Well, welcome back to High Cheese with Darren Maloney. Well, we got him. Our crack staff down at the Department of Justice, led by Merrick Garland, got Barney Rubble to plead. Let me just read an article here from the New York Post. Again, this is for February 4th, Friday, February 4th, 2022. Article is from February 2nd from the Post. So it says here, the caveman's son of a New York judge pleaded guilty Wednesday to storming the U.S. Capitol during the riots last year. Aaron Mostofsky, 35, was one of the most memorable rioters who broke into the Capitol sporting a stolen bulletproof vest, fur pelts, a walking stick, and carrying a stolen riot shield. Mostofsky is the son of Shlomo Mostofsky, a Brooklyn Supreme Court judge and a prominent figure in the Orthodox Jewish community. Now he is staring down a 12 to 18-month federal prison term after copying a civil disorder, theft of government property, and entering and remaining in a restricted building or grounds charge. He will be sentenced on May 6th. Well, I don't see any insurrection there. Now remember, this guy, his apartment was raided by the FBI soon after. I think it's just comical that they spend all this time on him. Now, just a reminder, there are still a number of those that rioted that are down in that D.C. jail, and it doesn't look like they're getting back out. Judge has said that they are a threat to society, and that's why they're staying in there. And I just don't understand why the ACLU is not involved, and it's just completely out of line, and it's un-American. And one of my brothers made a really insightful comment. He says, the judicial system is no longer about justice. It's no longer about the truth. All it is about is protecting, and again, this is on the Democratic side, all it is about protecting those on your side of the aisle, whether you're a judge, whether you're a politician, or whomever. Now, this may be a woke judge that is completely petrified of working class people. And that's a problem, because when you have judges that are afraid, you know they're not going to come down with a fair decision on anything. So I want to know why these people are still in there. And from what you hear, they're being abused. Where's the ACLU? Where are all these other organizations trying to help these people? And again, I'm not saying these people are perfect. They may have done some bad things, and you should be prosecuted for it. But to keep them in jail for this long and abuse them, that's just wrong. Now, you also hear these comments about January 6th. Oh, these people defiled sacred places. And I'm going to tell you, this is what defiling is. And I'm going to read you a couple articles that I just came across. And the first one is an article about the book by Peter Schweitzer. It's titled Red-Handed: How American Elites Get Rich Helping China Win. And in it, it reveals how 23 former U.S. senators and congressmen have lobbied for Chinese military or intelligence companies after leaving office. Many lawmakers cash in after leaving office by becoming lobbyists for corporations and other special interests. But one would hope that they would not become advocates for America's primary economic and political adversary, Communist China, by lobbying for outcomes that run counter to the United States' long-term interests. Now, let me give you a few names from that list. John Boehner, former Speaker of the House. Ed Royce. Norm Coleman. Remember all these people years ago? Some of them were Republicans, and they were out there touting how, oh, yes, we're real Republicans. We've got America's interest at heart. Well, you don't. Joe Lieberman, that's a surprise. It really is. Barbara Boxer, that's not a surprise. And here's a real problematic one for me. You've got William Cohen, a former elected official, who is not only a former elected official, he was the Secretary of Defense under Bill Clinton. Here he is lobbying for the Chinese government. I just think it's disgusting. And these are the people that are defiling Washington. Let me switch to another article. This is from CNBC. Headline says, Senate GOP suggests Biden Fed nominee Sarah Bloom Raskin used government ties to help financial tech firm. There's a couple of bullets. It says here, Senate Republicans suggest Sarah Bloom Raskin used her status as a former government official to help a company whose board she sat on get special access to the Fed's payment system. Raskin is President Joe Biden's nominee for the top-ranked supervisory post at the Federal Reserve. Raskin repeatedly refused to answer questions from Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis about whether she called the Federal Reserve on behalf of that company, Reserve Trust, after joining its board. So apparently Raskin, she worked at the Fed and at the Treasury, several years ago, left and then took a position on the board of directors with this company, Reserve Trust, which is a fintech company. This company soon after requested that it receive some inside information that's only given to banks usually. And that information is called a master account. Now, I don't know what it is, but it's irrelevant. Just it's important information that they were denied at first. So Reserve Trust was initially denied this information. And Raskin, she makes a phone call to the Fed, and suddenly they get the information. Wow, isn't that nice? Now, here's the real kicker on this. She worked there for 2 years as on the board of directors. I think it was a board of directors. They reference it as a director, but I'm assuming it's a board of directors. She gets paid $1.5 million for 2 years' work. That's probably the only thing she did during those 2 years, but she was paid $1.5 million. I just find that disgraceful. And this is what the swamp is all about, and this is what Trump was fighting, and this is what we have to continue to fight. Let me just give you a synopsis of it. So then the senator said, so let me recap. You leave Treasury. You serve on the board of Reserve Trust for 2 years. Their first application for a master account is denied. But after the denial, you call the Federal Reserve, and Reserve Trust receives a Fed master account, the only state-chartered trust company in the country to get one. And you walk away with $1.5 million. Something just doesn't smell right with the way this played out. My state's companies, my constituents, have been stonewalled, have been slow-walked, and have not been able to get approval, even though they've been working with the Fed for 2.5 years on our very specific guidelines for getting master accounts. So look, if you're Loomis, how do you feel? You've got constituents that are trying to get the same information. They still don't have it. But Raskin's company, they get it like that. And Raskin walks away with $1.5 million. Now, just a note is that Raskin is the wife of Jamie Raskin, that mouse-faced congressman that was on the congressional litigation team for Trump's impeachment. Shocking. Now, a third one I just wanted to bring up is I don't know if you remember, Richard Burr was investigated by the Department of Justice a couple of years ago or 2 years ago about making certain trades, possibly illegal trades. It said federal agents and prosecutors were investigating whether Burr, a North Carolina Republican, illegally used information from congressional briefings about the coronavirus to sell $1.65 million in stock before the pandemic hit in 2020. Burr's lawyers announced in January 21 that the Justice Department had notified them that it will not bring charges. So they didn't bring charges to Burr, but they brought charges on Barney Rubble. I don't think that's time well spent, Department of Justice. So now what Burr's trying to do is he doesn't want any of his cell phone information leaked to the public. Initially, a judge says, yes, you can't, that cell phone information doesn't have to be provided to the public. I forget what newspaper said, no, we would like it. They appealed it, and now the appeals court may say that Burr's cell phone information may be made public. So we shall say. But look, this is the swamp, and this is what Trump came in to do away with. Now, I'm a former public official in New Jersey, and I used to go to plenty of ethics courses, and essentially what they would be is just an attorney up there just reading you the ethics law. But that bar is so low, and it makes it so easy for people to just jump over the ethics hurdle with no problem. And I always make this case, unless we have people that are really religious in government, in elected office, it'll be very difficult to do this. Now, my answer is we have an all-out ban on any type of stock holdings by anybody that works in the federal government. If you want to invest money, it goes into some generic fund that an elected official or anyone can put their money into. Or if you own stock, you shift it out and put it in there. Now, you're in government not to make money, it's to help people. Remember, many cases you should go into government and you may wind up losing money. But that's the reality. And the problem is we've professionalized the bureaucrats and we've dumbed down any sense of ethics with that. And that's a problem. All right, let me switch to our friends up in Canada, the Canadian truckers. Let me just give you an update of what's going on there. We've got a whole psyop going on with the media up there. They are not giving you the true story. They fail to report how many trucks are actually there. There was one report that they said, over 100 trucks are there. Now, there's plenty of trucks. There's hundreds and hundreds to thousands of trucks that are in Ottawa as we speak. Now, what they did is the police diverted a lot of these trucks to different parking lots throughout Ottawa. And there are hundreds of trucks in these parking lots. I saw a report from one of them. It was I think it was a baseball stadium. There were 100 trucks there. And there are dozens and dozens of these parking lots throughout Ottawa. Now, I find it interesting that there's can we get a drone picture of the entire city of Ottawa? Maybe we can pick up the trucks that are really there. But I just find it interesting. You got drone footage of the outside Parliament, but you have nothing covering the entire city. I wish somebody would put a drone up and take a look at what's going on in the outskirts of Ottawa. So listen, this is having an effect. Quebec just pulled its vax tax legislation. They were proposing to tax additionally people that weren't vaxxed. I don't know how much it was going to be, but they pulled it. Erin O'Toole, he was the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada. He was ousted as leader. He just wasn't conservative enough. Now, this is the gentleman that ran against Trudeau, I think a year or two ago. And at the last 2 or 3 weeks, he took turn left on some of his positions. And it actually cost him. He probably would have beat Trudeau if he stayed conservative and didn't go left at the last moment. No one understands why he did that, but he's out. Now, they haven't named a replacement, but it should be coming soon. Now, here's the interesting thing regarding that. The Globe and Mail, which is maybe I think it's the biggest newspaper in Canada, they came out with an editorial, and it says, Canada needs a progressive conservative party. Orwellian. It's just bizarre how these people are thinking in these institutions. Caregivers. Now, caregivers have now sued to be allowed to go into senior centers. I think that they're the equivalent of visiting nurses here, but they haven't been allowed to visit their clients if you're unvaxxed. So they're now suing, and they may get somewhere. I think that they will. So let's go to a clip of Trudeau, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
I want to be very clear. We are not intimidated.
Well, yes, Trudeau, you are intimidated. Any leader that has to come out and say they're not intimidated are intimidated. And you really don't help yourself when you're in hiding. So what I want to do in contrast, I want to play you another clip. And these are the Alberta truckers that are blocking the border. And they're in negotiations now with some people from the RCMP, and they're looking to have Alberta drop the vax passport. So let me just play this, and then we'll get back. And again, it's my way of showing you some contrast between people who are a person who is afraid versus people who are not afraid. Let's go to the clip.
They said if we open that lane of traffic, they will drop the rural mandates and what's that other one called? The RE? The REP program.
What is that?
That means
the tier system.
The tier system.
Social differences from vegan people to
Vax passports, that's correct.
Alex,
RCMP. Yeah. And they do not meet our requests, that border is shut again immediately.
Amen.
And they're all in favor of that. Show of hands.
Does that mean we open now?
We open now just for one lane to show faith that we are opening it. They meet at 2 o'clock. If they meet our request and drop their mandates, it's open.
And if they don't,
If they don't, we shut it down again.
Don't you just love these guys? Now, they were smart enough. They rented out an entire restaurant as their base to use during these negotiations. And I don't know if you picked it up, but the RCNP was in there. Now, the RCNP is our equivalent of the FBI. So you've got negotiations going on in here. And just listen to the leadership and listen to the commitment these truckers have versus Trudeau, who's weak and he's in hiding. Now, there's good news. Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, just announced that he's dropping the vaccine passport. And this thing is ongoing, and this thing will continue. Okay, let's take a break. Okay, welcome back. Now, with Canada, Edmonton and Quebec are thinking about having their own convoys head up to their capitals. Uh, in Quebec, you've got the Winter Carnival up there, so it's a big to do up there in Quebec City, and any convoy that goes up there will make its point. And I wish them the best of luck in doing that. Now, Trudeau has also come out and said that he's not going to use the military against the truckers, which, what president would ever use the military against their own people? Now, his father in the past had embedded the military against the FLQ, and I think there was Indigenous and Canadian uprising that they embedded the military in with police. But two things. One is I highly advise that Trudeau not do that, and I don't think he has the guts to do it anyway. But this is ongoing. We shall see. The weekend is coming up, and we'll see if more people come into the outside of Parliament. And again, this is an entire work in progress that the entire world is monitoring. Okay, I want to switch to something as serious, and this has to do with the number of people that are being denied transplants by doctors because they're not vaccinated. Now, I've got reports here that Boston Brigham and Women's Hospital is denying a man a heart transplant. I've got a report here that a toddler from Cyprus is being denied a heart transplant because his or her parents are not vaccinated. I've been aware for a while of Colorado. There's some clinics in Colorado that are denying people transplants. And then there's a North Carolina man. I think he's a veteran or an ex-military guy that's being denied because he doesn't want to take the vaccine. And this guy's been had COVID twice, and it's very, very discouraging. And I'm very disappointed in the medical profession. Now, part of my job is I was a commissioner on an insurance fund, and I used to deal with doctors and lawyers quite a bit. And I've noticed over the years that doctors have been getting politicized, and it's very concerning. And I just don't understand how they can deny to give him the accommodations when they don't want to get vaxxed. I mean, your whole do no harm. Well, you're doing harm here. Now, I'm looking at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. They came out with a statement that says, well, we have evidence, and I think they were using old data. I think it was data from months ago, because I'm looking at the the American Society of Transplantation. Now, they came out with a more recent study, and this is from the United Kingdom NHS Registry study. And they came out with a data that said that, well, they say that 12.6% of unvaccinated recipients die versus 7.7% of vaccinated recipients pass away. So that's a 4.9% difference. Now, here's the thing. You can accommodate these people. It's very easy to accommodate these people because here's and I know that they're not using a fair calculation when determining to deny these people services. They never factor in two things. And I'd like to see it. If they can prove me wrong, prove me wrong. But here's two things they never or rarely factor in. And it's even the federal government too. But here's what they don't factor in. They don't factor in the fact that you have a probability, there's a big probability that you're not going to get coronavirus. So an American has a choice to either get vaxxed or not get vaxxed. And you have to weigh in the probability that there is a majority percentage that you are not going to get coronavirus. Now, I looked early on with Delta, and you take a snapshot of where the population versus how many people got coronavirus. It was 16 to 18%. So round it off to 20%. Well, you've got an 80% chance of not getting it on average. Now, I know there's different variables if you live out in the woods versus you live in the inner city. But to frame this, let's just talk about averages. So you have a probability of not getting coronavirus. Now, you have to weigh that in when you do an analysis on what the probability is I'm going to die from coronavirus. And when you factor everything in, it's a very small chance that you are going to die from coronavirus. And with transplant recipients, it's a much higher. It's comorbidity, and you have to take special care. But you can have accommodations for these people. Now, the vaccine itself is less effective on transplant recipients because they have to take immunosuppressant medication, and that waters down the vaccine. So it's less effective on somebody receiving a transplant. And those antibodies also diminish quicker than somebody that is not on the same immunosuppressant drugs. So you have to factor all that in. And these doctors in Colorado, Boston, all of these places, they're not factoring it in for some reason. And I've never heard of a doctor not trying to work with any patient in order to accommodate them. Now, these people can be easily accommodated. Now, instead of isolating them for 3 weeks in the hospital, isolate them for 2 or 3 months until this COVID epidemic goes away. Now, it may cost a little bit of money, and it's just extremely, extremely disappointing to see that doctors who are supposed to not harm people, harming people. Now, GOP Rep Ben Klein introduced a bill 2 days ago to bar organ transplant centers from denying services to the unvaccinated. And that makes sense. Now, this has been supported by this legislation is supported by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. And to quote, the legislation reveals that Americans are not receiving the needed medical care they need or desire due to their vaccine status. Now, that's a prudent decision. Now, that's a prudent comment. This heavy-handed denying of unvaxxed people is just deadly. You're becoming death doctors. Now, on a related note, Pfizer has petitioned the FDA to authorize 2 doses of its vaccine for, listen to this, 6-month to 5-year-old children. Now, I don't understand why you would want to give an unnecessary vaccine to your kid when all the science and all the statistics tell us that the probability of your kid dying from coronavirus is infinitesimal. It is so small that there is no reason to do this. And what I find really surprising is that I'm sure a lot of these parents that want to get their infants vaxxed also only want their kids to have organic food, no non-GMO food, but they're willing to vax their kid? I just don't understand this. To me, it just feels that this is becoming a vaccine cult, and there's something wrong with this. I don't know what the answer is. There's something, that we'll have to find out in the future, but there is something wrong here with people that are vaxxing their kids unnecessarily. Now, again, it's your choice. If you want to do it, I don't understand it. It just doesn't make sense to do this to your kid. Okay, let's go to Russia. Let's see what we've got this week in Russia. Now, Putin has come out and says that America and NATO are ignoring the concerns of Russia. You have to understand something. When you're negotiating with somebody, and I don't think that the people in the U.S. government right now understand this. You have to put your head inside of the person at the other end of the table. And you think about Putin. And again, I'm not defending Putin, but here he is. He's under Obama. He took Crimea. And his point is that right now I can protect Crimea from any Ukraine forces. However, if Ukraine joins NATO, I have now got to protect myself in Crimea from the entire NATO force. So right now, as is, he doesn't have to worry about Crimea. However, if Ukraine joins NATO, he now has to protect Crimea from the entire NATO force. Now, the other thing you have to worry about, too, is that Ukraine is corrupt. And what are they going to do if they join NATO? Are they suddenly going to get beer muscles and get into a fight with Russia over Crimea just because they now have NATO behind them? And that's what happens. They have to understand human nature. I use the term beer muscles because guy sits in a bar, he has 10 beers, he suddenly wants to fight everybody because he thinks he's invincible. And that's what Ukraine is going to feel if they join NATO. Now, again, I am not supporting Putin in any way, but you have to understand that's what his perspective is right now. Now, I like what Josh Hawley said. He was on Tucker the other day, and he was saying, well, you know what? Make the commitment. Tell Putin we don't need Ukraine in NATO. We don't need Ukraine in NATO. Why take on a corrupt country? Why take on the problems of Ukraine just for the sake of gaining territory if you're NATO? Okay, Russia is also now conducting war games in Belarus. Putin is off to China. He met with Chairman Xi, and they came back and called for a halt to NATO expansion. And China's watching this. China wants to see what we're going to do with Russia because it's likely going to impact what they do with Taiwan. And Biden is in a bad predicament because he's a weak guy. Everybody involved with negotiating with Russia is weak, and that's the perception of everyone in the world. And China knows they're weak. Putin's at the Olympics, and I just saw a story where he was nodding off when the Ukrainian athletes were marching in the parade. So we'll see. The U.S. has sent 3,000 troops to Eastern Europe. They've got 2,000 troops coming from Fort Bragg in North Carolina, and then 1,000 troops that were already in Germany. They're moving over into Poland and Romania. And you got to understand is that there's not enough troops, and that's including Ukraine troops, that's going to stop the Russian army if they want to go in. I think the U.S. has already said, well, we'll inflict a lot of pain on them, or as much pain as we can. Now, a very bizarre comment that the U.S. came out with a couple of days ago was this false flag. They came out with a false flag, say, Russia is going to create some kind of video that shows Ukrainians killing Russians and attacking Russian troops or something along those lines. And that's just bizarre. Why would they even say that? Why would, it just shows your weakness. There's absolutely no reason for them to say that. All right, let's take another break and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. We're going to turn to stocks right now, and I'm going to play you a clip from David Roach. David Roach is a longtime strategist for quantum economics, and look, I think he's a globalist. But what I wanted to point out is that he is telling us that the stock market is probably going to turn bearish. He's essentially said that people are just ignoring reality. And let me play it, and then we will discuss.
Time looking at Russia and looking at China and the relationships between those powers, what the leaders are aiming at, and what the U.S. is aiming at. And I come to a negative, very negative view of the world. But most of my clients, I come back to this point, believe this is background music in a bull market. That's a fact. In other words, I think the geopoliticals, I think the economics are all not pointing in the right direction. But the majority of the investors with whom I deal consider that many of those factors, which worry you and worry me, are background noise to a bull market.
Very interesting what he said. And this has been reinforced by Mohammed El-Arian. He's economist on Wall Street. Again, I think he's a globalist, but he's been saying for the longest time that the stock market has been driven by three things: TINA, FOMO, and buying the dip. None of these have anything that have to do with fundamentals. And TINA, what TINA is there is no alternative. So what's happened is that the Fed has driven rates so low and have made so many other alternate assets unappealing that there's no place to put your money but in the stock market. Now, that's not a good situation. The second is FOMO, fear of missing out. Now, everybody's heard about herd mentality. Everybody wants to get on the bandwagon, and everybody doesn't want to miss out on a good thing, whether it makes sense or not. And that's the market that we have now. And then the third thing, buying the dip. That's all I heard last year, 2021. Buying the dip, buying the dip. Well, it doesn't make sense to buy in the dip for the sake of buying on the dip. And that's why we've had the market run up. And El Arian's been saying for the longest time, you have to come down to reality. And I think this is the year. I mean, look what we've seen so far. We've seen wild fluctuations in prices, up 1,000, down 1,000, and everything is up and down, up and down. And at some point, it's got to give. And I don't know any time in history where we've had such volatility where it didn't end in something negative for the stock market. And again, I'm not giving you any advice. I'm just trying to inform you. So let's touch upon a couple of things that we had this week. First thing I just want to talk about, our debt. We've passed $30 trillion in debt. That's troubling. And I don't understand why there wasn't more play in the press on this thing. It seems like they just ignored it. Again, if you're trying to ignore the bad things in hope of faking people out, let them think that everything's good, well, that's what you do. Now, one thing said is that we've got $30 trillion debt, and I think the last time we've had this high debt in relation to GDP was right after World War II. And inflation was really hot back then. It's hotter than it is now, so only expect inflation to get worse. Now, the Fed's already told us that this is not transitional inflation. So the question is, how long are we stuck with this? And I don't know. I don't think they know. Which leads me to the second thing that happened this week, the jobs report. Well, the jobs report, which came out this morning, everyone estimated that it was going to be 150,000 added jobs. Well, guess what? 400,000 jobs were added. One thing that this tells me is that I think people just moving on from Omicron. Everybody in the press was saying, "Oh, we may not have such a good report. It may be tempered because of Omicron." But I do think that if we do read into this, I think this report is telling us that people are putting Omicron behind them, going back to work, and I think that's a good thing. But one thing I do want to point out is that on Wednesday, ADP came out with an employment report. They were estimating plus 200,000 jobs, but actually it came in as minus 301,000 jobs. And it caused these so-called experts to freak out. They, all of a sudden after this happened, they say, well, maybe we won't get 150,000 jobs on Friday. And then the whole narrative changed. You saw CNBC and Bloomberg started saying, oh, we're going to lose 400,000 jobs and we're going to lose 300,000 jobs. It could be terrible, the Friday report. And I just want to, this is how disingenuous this finance press is. They're all looking to cover their butts. They're all looking to change the narrative on a dime, as long as they don't look bad and things look good for stocks. And I find that problematic, and I think they have to stop. So let's move on to the stocks for the week. We've had, the S&P finished for the week up 1.5%. Year to date, the S&P is down negative 5.57%. The NASDAQ on Friday was up 2.4%. For the year, they're negative 9.89%. The Dow was up 1.1% for the week, but it is down 3.44% for the year. Again, expect pain this year. I just don't see any of the indexes finishing up this year. I see a lot of volatility that will continue. I see interest rates going up, and I just don't see earnings being able to support this for the rest of the year. The 10-year bond finished at 1.96%, and that's up almost 9 basis points. Amazon, they had very good earnings. They were up 13.5%. And Meta, which is Facebook, they had an awful quarter, and they got hammered. And they lost about 25% of their stock value this week. Geez, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Gold was up 0.26% to 1808.8. And year to date, gold is down 1.27%. Silver was up 0.65%, but year to date, it's down 3.58%. Bitcoin was up it was up 13% to $41,466.72. XRP was up 11.2% to 67 cents. And Ethereum was up 15.07 to $2,982.53. Oil up 1.83% to 91.92. Year to date, oil is up 22.32. Okay, just a couple of items before I go. The first is Jeff Zucker was fired from CNN this week, apparently because a girlfriend / coworker was exposed, and apparently that's against the rules at CNN, believe it or not. So he was fired, and I think Donald Trump hit the nail on the head when he said that Zucker was fired because he had terrible ratings. And I think that this whole thing about his girlfriend was just a hook to get rid of Zucker. But what a creepy place CNN is. I mean, you've got your in-house legal expert was caught playing with himself in a Zoom meeting. You've got pedophile producers. You've got Chris Cuomo, who was fired for breaking journalistic rules by advising his brother while he reported on him. And then you have Don Lemon, who is accused of sexual assault in the Hamptons. And I'm sure there's much more at CNN. And these creepy people, this creepy organization is giving us news. And I have a problem with that, and I hope you do. I hope CNN either goes out of business or just totally revamps itself because it's lousy news and it's a lousy organization. Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about is this Brian Flores situation. And Flores is suing the NFL and I think the Giants for racial discrimination. And I'll tell you, I have to tell you, my take on this thing may be a little different than everyone else's. I do think that Flores probably was window dressing for the interview process. I think the Giants, and this is normal with a lot of organizations when they hire, is that they'll interview and they'll find a candidate that they like, and then they'll just go through the motions with the other candidates that come in. And sometimes they will have a preferred candidate. And they will have window dressing interviews with other candidates. Now, with Flores, I don't think it was because he was black. I think he was window dressing, but it wasn't because he was black. Now, the thing that really disturbs me about the whole Brian Flores situation is his accusation that he was offered money to throw games by the owner of the team, Miami Dolphins. That's disturbing. And this was backed up, I guess, by Hugh Jackson, who is a former coach of the Cleveland Browns. He apparently says that the owner had paid him or wanted to pay him to throw games. Now, what happens when you throw games, you get a lousy record and you get a higher lottery position for the next year's draft. And I tell you, from what I see, is I don't put this beyond the NFL owners to do this. But I wouldn't be surprised. This is the same group of people that want to put Snoop in the halftime show for the Super Bowl. So should you be surprised when they want to throw games? Now, the NFL game actually is a lousy game. And now when you're talking about games being fixed, for lack of a better word, it's just going to become professional wrestling. And quite frankly, I'd rather watch professional wrestling than fixed football. All right, with that said, I just want to thank you, and I will see you next week. I hope you have a good weekend, and again, be safe.